The average house in the UK now costs around £268,000. That's not a mansion in Chelsea. That's just a normal house in a normal street. Meanwhile, the typical UK salary is just over £39,000 a year. Multiply that by 4.5 and the bank will lend you a maximum of about £175,000. You are more than £90,000 short of the average home before you even think about deposit. So the question is not can you afford a house in the UK? The question is what house can your salary actually buy right now? And there is one number most people never calculate. That changes the entire answer. By the end of this video, you will know yours. When my wife and I started looking for our first home, we thought the hard part would be saving the deposit. The hard part was everything we didn't see coming. We put offers on several houses we really liked, decent offers, and not one was accepted. After we finally had one accepted, then the solicitor bills started arriving. New searches, new invoices, fees we had never heard of. And 2 months after we moved in, our fixed water bill went up by 40% without any warning. That was the moment I realized most people budget for the mortgage and nothing else. What I'm about to show you is the full picture, not just what the bank will lend you, but what it actually costs you to own a home in this country today. Most people start their house search on Rightmove. They type in their dream location and their dream budget. Then they fall in love with a house they cannot afford. That is the wrong move. The best way is to start with one number and work backwards from there. I call it the 4.5 rule. Almost every major UK lender uses the same formula. They take your gross annual salary and multiply it by 4.5. That is your maximum mortgage offer, not a single penny more. On a £35,000 salary, the bank will lend you roughly £157,000. On £75,000 salary, roughly £337,000. On a £100,000 salary, you get up to £450,000. Those numbers look decent on paper, but the bank does not care whether you can eat after making the payment. They stress test your ability to repay at a much higher rate. If rates jump to 7 or 8% tomorrow, could you still pay? That is the question they are really asking. Some lenders will stretch to 5 or even 5.5 times your salary. But those deals come with higher rates, bigger deposits, and strict conditions. For this video, we are using 4.5 because that is the real world for the vast majority of UK buyers. The 4.5 rule, that is your starting point for everything else. Most people look at the UK average house price and assume that is what they need. £268,000 is a national average. That means almost nothing. The best way is to match your borrowing power to a specific region, because in this country, where you buy matters more than what you earn. If you earn £35,000 a year, your maximum mortgage is roughly £157,000. At a 10% deposit, your total budget is about £175,000. In the northeast, the average house costs around £163,000. You're in the game. In Yorkshire, average price sits around £209,000. You are close, but tight. In Wales, the average is around £210,000. Some areas work, some don't. In London, the average is over £540,000. On a single salary of £35,000, London is not a conversation. If you earn £50,000 a year, your maximum mortgage is around £225,000. With a 10% deposit, your budget is roughly £250,000. Now the Midlands opens up, the Northwest opens up, parts of the Southwest start to appear, but London and the Southeast are still out of reach on a single salary. If you earn £100,000 a year, your maximum mortgage is around £450,000. With a deposit, your budget is roughly £500,000. In most of England outside London, you are buying a genuinely beautiful family home. But even on £100,000, London barely lets you through the door. The average London property is over £540,000. Your budget is £500,000. You are still below the average in the capital. And here is something that catches people off guard at this level. Once you earn over £100,000, you start losing your personal allowance. For every £2 you earn above £100,000, you lose £1 of your tax-free amount. That creates an effective tax rate of 60% in that income band. Your take-home does not scale the way you expect it to. Now you know what bank will lend you, but the bank's maximum is not your budget. What comes next is the gap between those two numbers, and that gap is where most people get into trouble. Most people hear 10% deposit and think that is the only upfront cost. I thought the same thing when we started saving. The best way to plan is to budget for every cost, not just the deposit. A 10% deposit on £250,000 house is £25,000. That is the headline number. But here is what nobody tells you. until the invoices start arriving. Solicitor and conveyancing fees will run you somewhere between £1,000 and £2,500. And it does not stop at one invoice. During our purchase, the solicitor kept sending new bills for additional searches we had never heard of, environmental searches, drainage searches, local authority searches. Everyone costs money, and everyone is apparently essential. A home survey costs between £400 and £1,500, depending on the level you choose. The mortgage arrangement fee can be up to £1,000 on top of that. Removal costs another £500 to £1,500. Add it all together, on a £250,000 house with a 10% deposit, your total upfront cost before you collect the keys is north of £30,000. Not £25,000, at least £30,000. That extra £5,000 catches people out because they budgeted for deposit and nothing else. And that is just the upfront cost. Wait until what happens after you move in. Most people forget stamp duty exists until the bill lands. The best way is to know the bands before you ever make an offer. Since April 2025, the first-time buyer rules changed. You pay zero stamp duty on first £300,000 of your purchase. If your home costs between £300,000 and £500,000, you pay 5% on the amount above £300,000. So a first-time buyer purchasing a £400,000 house pays £5,000 in stamp duty. But here's the cliff edge that trips people up. If your property costs even £1 over £500,000, you lose that first-time buyer relief entirely. You pay the full standard rates, starting from £125,000. A home costing just under £500,000 triggers about £10,000 in stamp duty. A home costing just over £500,000 triggers more than £15,000 in stamp duty. That is an extra £5,000 in tax for a £5,000 difference in price. If you are buying anywhere near that threshold, know exactly where the line is. And if you are buying a second property or a buy-to-let, there is now a 5% surcharge on every single band. The same £400,000 property costs over £30,000 in stamp duty as a second home. So far, we have covered what the bank will lend you, what each salary bracket can buy, and the real deposit cost and the stamp duty trap. But there is one more number that changes everything, and most people never calculate it. Let me pause here for a second. Look at what you already know. You know which regions match your bracket. You know the deposit is never just 10%. And you know where the stamp duty cliff edge sits. That already puts you ahead of most first-time buyers walking into a mortgage appointment. But remember what I said at the start? There's one number most people never calculate. We haven't reached it yet. What comes next is the part that separates people who own their home comfortably from people who lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering how they are going to pay the bills. This is the number I told you about at the start. I call it the real number. Here is how it works. Most people use the bank's maximum as their budget. The bank will lend you as much as they are allowed to. That does not mean you can afford it. The best way is this. Take your gross monthly income and multiply it by 0.3. That is the maximum you should spend on total housing costs every month. Not just the mortgage. Everything including mortgage, council tax, building insurance, energy and water bill, and service charges if you are in a flat. Let me run this on a £35,000 salary. Your gross monthly income is little under £3,000. 30% of that is around £875 a month for total housing costs. Now let me subtract what you will actually pay beyond the mortgage. Council tax in England averages around £190 a month. Home insurance runs about £30 a month. Energy bills costs roughly £140 a month. Water bill averages about £50 a month. That is around £400 a month before a single penny goes towards your mortgage. Subtract that from your £875 limit and you are left with around £470 a month for the actual mortgage. At an interest rate of around 5.5% over 30 years, that supports a mortgage of roughly £80,000, not £157,000, not the bank's maximum, £80,000. That is a real number on a £35,000 salary. If you follow the 30% rule to the letter, let me be honest with you, very few people in this country can follow that rule perfectly and still buy a home. Most first-time buyers spend closer to 40 or even 50% of their net income on housing. But you should know the gap between what bank will lend you and what you can comfortably afford, because that gap is the difference between owning a home and owning a financial headache. Always calculate your real number before you start looking. Now, if that number feels impossible on a single salary, there's a reason. It is almost impossible on a single salary for most of the country, and the data proves it. Most people assume they need to do this alone. The best way for the most of the country is a joint application. According to Halifax, around 62% of all first-time buyer mortgages in 2024 were joint applications. That is not a nice to have. For most of the UK, dual income is how people buy homes now. Take two earners on £35,000 each. Combined salaries £70,000. Multiply by 4.5 and your joint mortgage is around £315,000. Add a 10% deposit and your budget is around £350,000. Now you are competitive in almost every region of the country outside London and the southeast. In Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham or Nottingham, that is a solid 3 to 4 bedroom family home. Even in Bristol and Edinburgh, you are looking at real options. This is the dual income advantage. It doesn't just add, it transforms your entire position in the market. If you are under 40 and saving for your first home, there is one tool you need to know about, the lifetime ISA. You can put in up to £4,000 a year. The government adds 25% on top. That is £1,000 free money every single year, just for saving towards a home. Over 5 years, with even modest growth, that builds towards roughly £25,000. It's not fast. Nobody is pretending it is fast. It is the most tax-efficient way to build a deposit in the UK right now. But there is one catch. The property must cost £450,000 or less. That works for most of the country, but it rules out much of London. And if you withdraw the money for anything other than buying your first home or retirement, you lose 25% of the total. That is not just losing the bonus. You actually lose more than the bonus because of how the penalty is calculated. So only open one if you are genuinely saving for a home or for retirement. When I was looking for the house, I didn't know about half the cost I have just told you. Nobody sat me down and explained the real number. Nobody warned me about the solicitor invoices that keep coming. Nobody mentioned that your utility bills can jump 40% within months of moving in. I figured it all out by paying for it. That is why I made this video, so you don't have to figure it out the expensive way. So that one number I mentioned at the start, the one most people never calculate, it is the real number. Your gross monthly income times 0.3 minus council tax, insurance, energy and water. Whatever is left, that is your actual mortgage budget, not the bank's maximum, not the right move dream. Your real, livable and sleep at night number. Calculate it before you start looking at the houses. And here is one thing almost nobody considers. Check what the council tax band is before you make an offer. A band D property and a band F property on the same street can differ by more than £100 a month in council tax. That is over £1,000 a year you might not have budgeted for. The estate agent will never mention it. Ask it anyway. Let me pull this together quickly. Know the 4.5 rule and what your salary actually unlocks. Match your bracket to a region. Don't fall in love with the house first. Budget at least £5,000 beyond your deposit for solicitors, surveys and fees. Check the stamp duty bands, especially the £500,000 cliff edge. Calculate the real number. Gross income times 0.3 minus all housing costs equals your true mortgage budget. If a single income is not enough, a joint application transforms your position. Open a lifetime ISA if you are under 40 and buying under £450,000, and check the council tax band before you make an offer. Now that you know what house you can actually afford, there is one other purchase that quietly destroys everything you have just built. If you get it wrong, your car. I made a video on that. It's a good one. But before you click on it, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you over there.